The gold-made jumpsuits and screaming crowds were miles away, replaced by the uneven glow of a single lamp and the unyielding truth of his own regrets. He picked up the phone and dialed a base operator, voice low and steady. "Request to see Father Malone," he said, glancing at the cracked mirror above the dresser. His reflection looked exhausted, lines deeper than his 30 years, eyes shadowed with doubt. The operator asked for details. He withheld them. "Tomorrow," she said. He would come tomorrow morning at first light to the wooden chapel on the camp's fringe. He placed the receiver back, heart thundering in his ears. Outside, a thunderhead rolled in, promising rain that might reach this far by dawn. He leaned back, pressing his palms against the cool metal of the bed frame, as if it could ground him. Memories surfaced, marching in formation when orders barked like gunfire, the camaraderie of men forced to rely on each other in fear and mud. The handshake of a fellow GI who swore he'd be okay mere hours before his body tumbled back in a flag-draped crate. The radio crackled again, this time a scratchy melody, one of his own songs, cut through the static. "If I can dream of a better land." He sat upright, the melody both comfort and curse. His voice would carry hope to some, but for others it was a reminder of the gulf between his world and theirs. He closed his eyes, letting the tune wash over him, each note a question. Could a song change the course of a man's fate? Could it stand between a trembling soldier and the unknown days ahead? He rose and moved to the window, pulling aside the curtain. The highway glistened under wet lamplight, mirroring the pulse of his thoughts. His reflection stood behind him, phantom-like. In a whisper he spoke to the man he used to be, the young private who learned the weight of a rifle and the sting of loss. The star before him was a stranger. The man in the glass was someone he needed to reconcile with the uniform he'd left behind. Tomorrow he would walk into that chapel as himself, not the king of rock, not the Hollywood idol, but a former soldier bearing no fanfare. Tonight he was suspended between two worlds, caught in the hush before confession. The radio fell silent. He flicked the dial, searching for anything that might break through the quiet, but found only dead air. He exhaled, long and low, and let the darkness fill him. In the stillness, he heard the steady thump of his own heartbeat, each beat a step toward dawn, toward an apology unspoken, toward the chance to stand once more beside his brothers in arms. The heavy oak door groaned as Elvis pushed it open, and a rush. Late evening, the rain-slicked Louisiana highway shimmers like a sharpened blade under the truck's headlights. The engine coughs to a stop at Fort Polk's iron gates, its rusted sticker of a guitar peeling in the downpour. A lone figure steps out in a dark overcoat. No security detail, no flashing cameras, no entourage. It's Elvis. He's come to stand beside the 40 young men drilled by Captain James Caldwell, men bound for Vietnam at dawn. Spotting Elvis, Caldwell's voice cuts through the hush. "Here's our silken scene stealer, proof that fame and courage aren't the same." The recruits freeze. Elvis says nothing. He turns and walks away, boots splashing through the mud, his name echoing in the wet darkness. One private watches him go, eyes wide with wonder and doubt. Rain tapped insistently against the single-pane window, each drop like the echo of distant artillery. Inside the cramped motel room, the yellowed wallpaper peeled in curling strips, revealing raw plaster beneath. A lone ceiling fan churned humid air in lazy circles, stirring the heavy scent of sweat and stale coffee. Elvis Presley sat on the edge of the narrow bed, shoulders hunched, a battered transistor radio pressed to his ear. The tinny broadcast crackled with urgency. Elvis Presley flees Fort Polk after public rebuke by Captain James Caldwell, the announcer declared, voice thick with sensationalism. Elvis closed his eyes, letting the static blur into memory. He recalled the gray barracks of Friedberg, Germany, rows of bunks, flat sheets tucked tight, the cold snap of morning drill commands. He remembered the day he traded his uniform's brass buttons and polished boots for rhinestones and stage lights, though in truth the uniform had never felt as tight, nor the boots as heavy as the weight of expectation that followed his music around the globe. He shifted, fingertips brushing the edge of a small wooden box under the bed. The latch creaked as he opened it, revealing a stack of faded envelopes and a crumpled letter on soft, yellowing paper. It bore his mother's loopy handwriting. Not all victories are seen from afar. Some are measured only by the heart. He smoothed the fold lines, thumb absently tracing the curve of her signature. A hollow ache settled in his chest, uneven breaths rising and falling like the rumble of distant tanks. A knock at the door startled him. He didn't answer. Moments later, the doorknob rattled, but stopped. Whoever it was must have expected him to come out. Instead, he sank deeper. At the front, the flicker of a single beeswax candle danced against the rough-hewn altar, its flame sputtering with each breath of the stale, cavernous space. Elvis paused at the threshold, heart thudding louder than the distant rumble of trucks on the base beyond the stone walls. In the pew just before the altar knelt Father Malone, his black cassock stark against the pale flagstones. Beside him, seated on a shabby folding chair, was Captain James Caldwell. No uniform now, only a plain, threadbare suit that did little to hide the rigid set of his shoulders or the haunted hollows beneath his eyes. He glanced up as Elvis approached, eyes narrowing into steely question marks. "Elvis Presley," Caldwell said without rising, voice low and cool. "You've come." Elvis closed the door behind him with a soft click and stepped forward, boots making hushed scuffs on the stone. He bowed his head slightly at the priest, offering no other greeting. "I'm not here for forgiveness," he murmured, voice echoing in the vaulted ceiling. "I came to be seen." Caldwell's gaze flicked to Father Malone, then back. A tense silence unfurled, broken only by the candle's fragile sputter. Outside, a sparrow tapped at a window pane, its persistent rhythm like a metronome counting down to confrontation. Finally, Caldwell spoke. "My brother, Danny, died last year in Korea. He loved your music. He carried your records in his pack, said they kept him alive in the trenches. When word came he didn't make it back, I burned every album I had of you. I told myself idols were lies, fantasies that meant nothing in a foxhole." Elvis felt the weight of each word settle in the hollow of his chest. He remembered his own brother, Jesse, how the sight of fragile graves had driven him to pour every note into his songs. He swallowed before answering, voice gentle but steady. "I can't claim to know your loss, sir, but I've lived with my own share of ghosts." Caldwell's jaw clenched. "You performed for crowds in Paris and New York, while those boys marched toward God-forsaken jungles. You sang Peace in the Valley on glossy stages, and they sang along, then stepped into the mud without a second thought." A flicker of regret crossed Elvis's expression. He moved closer, careful not to crowd the small circle of candlelight. I never meant my music to be an excuse for someone's death. I've tried to use my voice where it mattered. Here, now." He lifted his chin, gaze unwavering. "Tonight, I'm not the star you see in the press. I'm one man who knew what it was to wear a uniform, to wonder if he'd wake again." Father Malone leaned forward, voice gravelly with age. "Words can be weapons, too. They shape hope or destroy."
"There's you, I'll step aside. But if there's a chance I can give them something more than orders, something that stays with them when the bullets start, then I'll fight for that."
Caldwell closed his eyes, the lines of his face softening for a moment. When he opened them, the anger had cooled to something quieter, a fragile understanding. He nodded once, curtly, then rose to his feet, the stiff creak of his chair filling the silence. Elvis mirrored the movement, the candle flame dancing between them like a promise. The three stood in a triangle of light and shadow. Outside, thunder rumbled low, as if heralding the decision sealed in that room. A single raindrop splashed against the glass, then another, until the chapel was serenaded by a gentle downpour, as though nature itself was offering absolution. Caldwell's voice broke the stillness. "Tomorrow, then, you sing for them." Elvis inclined his head, relief softening the tension in his shoulders. "I'll be there." As he walked back toward the door, the candle flickered one last time before settling into steady glow. In that moment, the chapel felt less like a place of judgment and more like a bridge between two wounded souls, soldier and singer, bound by memory and the hope of redemption. The mess hall doors swung open to a low murmur of surprise. Long wooden tables stretched toward the far wall, scuffed by years of hurried meals and restless elbows. Fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a sterile hum, their pale glow reflecting off olive-drab trays and lacquered helmets piled in the corner. At the head of the room, Elvis Presley settled onto a simple wooden chair, his guitar case propped against a table leg like a silent sentinel. No stage lights, no cheering, only the dull clang of metal cutlery and the soft shuffle of 50 anxious feet. He lifted the guitar, fingertips brushing the worn frets, and welcomed the hush with a single unamplified chord. The note rolled out, filling the hall's hollow corners with unexpected warmth. Conversations halted. Plates paused halfway to lips. Men straightened, some stiff as rifle barrels, others slumped like spent cartridges. The sound was intimate, raw, skin against steel, breath against wood. Elvis began softly, his voice unadorned by echo chambers. A hymn for the tired, a lullaby for the restless. The melody wove between rows of fatigued faces, pulling at lines etched by youth and fear. One by one, eyes lifted from the floor, tracing the steady movement of his strumming hand. The tinny hum of the refrigerator in the back blended into the rhythm, an accidental metronome. Midway through the second verse, he paused. A single crack of silence snapped the fragile spell. He set the guitar into his lap, leaned forward, and looked directly at them with quiet intensity. "I don't know what scares you most," he said, voice thudding through the quiet. "But I do know that no man should march into the unknown with an empty heart. If my words can live inside you, carry you when the night is blackest, then I'm honored to be here." A rustle of movement followed. A young recruit rose from halfway down the hall. His uniform was too new, buttons bright, boots still unscuffed, yet his face bore the same drawn tension as the others. He stepped forward, each footfall deliberate, until he stood before Elvis. He looked smaller than the soldier he aspired to be, shoulders hunched under memory heavier than 20 years should allow. "I'm Private John Dawson," he said, voice tight. He swallowed. "My father died in Korea last spring. He used to sing your songs around our table. Said they reminded him of home." His gaze flicked away as though afraid Elvis might judge the rawness there. "I hated you once for being this star far away, but today I see you're a man like the rest of us." Elvis reached out, placing his hand over Dawson's. The recruit's grip was unsteady, but sincere. Their eyes met, two men separated by fame and loss, bound by a shared ache.
A hush deeper than before descended, punctuated only by the distant chant of rain against the mess hall windows. Dawson settled back into his spot and Elvis lifted the guitar again. With a single breath, he launched into Peace in the Valley, each lyric weaving hope into the dense air. The recruits listened, breaths synchronized in a collective pulse. The room's acoustics, hard floors, barren walls, caught each vibration and flung it back like an embrace. No microphones meant no barrier between voice and soul. Every hushed note landed directly on the soldiers' hearts. As the last chord rang out and faded into the soft hiss of the kitchen vent, the men rose to their feet. Applause was tentative at first, sharp claps echoing against the low ceiling, then grew into a chorus of stamping boots and cheering voices. Some wiped damp eyes, others laughed, breaking tension long held in check. Elvis set his guitar aside, allowing the moment to live in their raw applause rather than keep it for himself. A corporal at the back called out, "Thank you, sir." Private Dawson whispered, "Thank you." And the words carried beyond gratitude. They were a promise of something better to come. Elvis offered a half smile, tipping his head in farewell. As he rose to leave, the collective energy of the hall seemed to lift him, granting a quiet reverence normally reserved for chapels or battlefields. Outside, the night air carried the scent of wet earth and gasoline. He paused under the neon motel sign, blinking against its harsh glare. Inside, he still felt the warmth of 50 young men's voices, their shared hope echoing with him, as if bound in an unbreakable cord. He understood then that music, when shared in raw simplicity, could knit torn hearts together, could stand between fear and courage. He slipped the guitar into its case and walked toward the highway, the distant hum of engines as steady as an advancing tide. Behind him, the mess hall's windows glowed with newfound light, a beacon for souls stumbling through a darkness he had only begun to understand. The road back to the motel was slick with fresh rain, each turn of the tires sending a fine spray of mist into the air. Elvis steered the Chevy toward the lone service station that clung to the roadside like a dying ember, its flickering neon sign half burned out. He killed the engine beneath the yellow glow, the quiet thrum of the motor replaced by the steady drip of water from the eaves. In the dim light, he made out the shape of an elderly woman behind the counter, shoulders bent under a threadbare shawl, eyes bright as the station's lone bulb. She shuffled forward when she saw him, cautious and curious. "You're the singer," she said, voice soft with age and surprise. He slid out of the car, boots pressing into the damp gravel. "Just a traveler tonight," he answered, offering a weary smile. His palms still buzzed from the evening's performance, as though the strings of his guitar had etched themselves into his skin. She watched him for a long moment, then reached under the counter. Her fingers emerged with a crumpled envelope and a small drawing on butcher paper, a stick figure clutching a guitar, standing beneath a bright yellow sun. In the corner, a child's scrawl read, "I am not afraid when there is music." "Took a while to find your trail," she said, voice cracking. "My boy was meant to be with those youngsters you sang for tonight. He died last week." Her gaze flicked to the sketch. "He drew this before he shipped out. Said if you came, he'd be safe." Elvis's throat tightened. He straightened, brushing the rain from his coat. "I'm sorry," he whispered, taking the picture with reverent hands. The paper trembled beneath his fingers, as though the boy's spirit lay folded within its lines. "Thank you for coming," the woman added, eyes glistening. "No fame or fortune can mend what's lost. But your voice, it gave him courage in his last days." He nodded, heart pinpricked by her words. She stepped back into the shadows, leaving him alone under the flickering neon. Elvis paused, the drawing tight against his palm, and let the night settle around him. Wind whispering through tall pines, the distant roll of a freight train, the soft pulse of his own breath. He drove on until the highway gave way to a narrow lane flanked by low wrought iron gates. Rain had turned the dirt road to slick clay, and every wheel track gleamed in the headlight's beam. He came upon the graveyard, quiet except for the rustle of wind through weathered headstones. The caretaker's shack was locked, So he slipped through an open gate and followed the path to a tall, unadorned marker standing apart from the rest. The inscription was simple: a name, the dates, and nothing more. No regiment, no medals. Just the stark finality of life measured.
Then he reached beneath his shirt and produced the small silver medallion he'd worn since his own days in uniform, a circular pendant stamped with the crest of his old division. Kneeling in the mud, Elvis let the medallion slip from his fingers until it rested beside the drawing. He pressed both hands into the damp earth, head bowed. The sky above opened in a gentle drizzle, each drop merging with a tear he refused to shed. He felt the weight of countless voices, soldiers he had never met, mothers he'd never known, the boy who had drawn him as a beacon of hope, all gathering in the hush around that solitary stone. He closed his eyes, inhaling the scent of wet grass and moss, and spoke aloud, though no one else was there to hear. "I promise to carry your song forward," he murmured, "to sing for those who cannot sing for themselves." Time felt suspended as he remained on his knees, a lone figure in the half-light, trembling not from cold, but from the gravity of remembrance. The wind rustled the trees overhead as if affirming his vow. When at last he rose, Elvis brushed the mud from his trousers and took one final look at the grave, an unremarkable slab of granite that held the weight of a life, cut short. Back in the car, he folded the shawl from the service station counter into the passenger seat, as though cradling the old woman's gratitude. The medallion and drawing lay together on the dashboard, testaments to a night's journey, from applause to absolution. As the engine roared to life, Elvis Presley drove into the dark, carrying with him the silent testimonies of those who would never return, and the promise that their voices, too, would live on in song. Weeks later, a worn copy of the Leesville Gazette fluttered across the threshold of the little cabin where Elvis had taken refuge. The front page carried a brief column under a bowed headline, "Courage in Silence." Below, a grainy photograph captured him at a wooden table in the camp mess hall. No spotlight, no glamour, just a bowed head, guitar laid flat before him, and a circle of young soldiers leaning in. Captain Caldwell's few lines beneath the image spoke volumes. "I believed valor was thrust by orders. Now I know it may be found in quiet resolve." The press, insatiable as ever, tried to pry him from anonymity. Dozens of telegrams and phone calls piled up on the desk by the window, each stamped urgent in raw ink. Reporters begged him onto radio shows, papered his rented mailbox with promise of cover stories, of lucrative appearances. Yet the only sound that came from the old cabin was the soft creak of its pine floorboards as Elvis moved between the dusty chair and the battered reel-to-reel tape deck. Late one evening, long after the calls had gone unanswered, he loaded a fresh tape. That voice belonged to Lieutenant Daniel Caldwell, Captain Caldwell's brother, captured months before his last patrol. The recording had been discovered tucked in the lining of a bomber jacket, its casing scarred by shrapnel. Elvis pressed send on the radio transmitter, routing it anonymously to stations across the Deep South. There was no note, no introduction, only the unvarnished voice, singing of tenderness amidst chaos. In the silence that followed, the world paused. Listeners recognized the tune, recognized the cadence of someone unaccustomed to melodies, but yearning to belong to something larger. Calls flooded the stations. "Who is that? Play it again." The song wove its way through living rooms and diners, unexpected solace on restless airwaves. That night, Elvis sat in the dim glow of a single lantern, its yellow halo flickering across the polished wood of his guitar. He didn't pick it up. Instead, he cued the tape of Daniel Caldwell, As the lieutenant's voice, so earnest, so raw, drifted through the cabin, Elvis closed his eyes and let the notes fill the room, each phrase pulling at memories of his own brother and the faces of every soldier who had heard his songs in brighter venues. He listened without playing a note, letting the song's unadorned truth wash over him. The violin, like whine of the tape, hissed through the speakers, and for the first time in years, Elvis felt no need to perform. He sat motionless, shoulders relaxed, chest rising and falling in rhythm with those delicate chords. The room's musty air seemed lighter, as though the walls themselves exhaled in relief. When the song ended, he sat in silence. The tape clicked into place, its reels still spinning with the afterglow of someone else's voice. Elvis opened his eyes, glancing at the window where the moon cast silver streaks over the rugged landscape. He whispered into the dark, "They hear you, brother." Morning arrived with a soft rain, and the local newspaper carried letters from listeners. Memories of sons, nephews, friends lost, gratitude for a song that spoke to their grief. The anonymous tape became a shared elegy, binding families separated by service and sorrow. Elvis folded his coat, gathered his guitar, and stepped outside into the gentle drizzle. No photographers waited. No flashing bulbs dared to breach the hush. With each step, he felt the quiet strength of unseen brothers at his back, their voices carried on winds of memory and melody. He paused at the crest of a rise, looking out over low-lying fields